Okay, welcome back to another episode in season 2.5 of Finding Common Ground. And we are in episode 4, Work with Differences. So we are exploring what does it mean to work not just across differences in terms of power, but differences in terms of generations. And I am keen to hear actually from the middle manager experience of that. And not just the middle manager thing, but the more specifically the millennial experience. So I'm just going to jump right in. Astrid, take it away. Why did you want to do this episode?
Oh, I think what's been interesting doing these episodes is that in our first one with Cam, you shared that it was surprising for you that it was a very normal experience to go through imposter syndrome. And it was surprising to me that it was surprising to you. Okay. So then it made me think about, okay, if what I'm experiencing is different to another generation, I'm forgetting that there is a new generation coming into the workforce, which is the Gen Zs. And I think Li Seng, that's exactly the experience that you're having, right? You're like a millennial boss, but you work with a millennial team mostly. And what is a bit different about your team is that you have a group of Gen Zs coming in and out as interns. And so you are very close to that, new wave of employees and new wave of work, the new workforce. How's that been for you? What are you noticing in the Gen Zs coming your way, and what are the differences between them and us?
And I think adding on top of that, there's also the complexity of a lot of the clients that you deal with are also from a different generation.
Yeah. Right? So I guess it's really a mix. So I suppose within my own team, it's really kind of having a small, first and foremost, my team isn't very big. It's only about 5 to 6 individuals on a full-time basis, right? Among them, we have really a mix of staff, a wide range of, but yeah, at the same time, we also have lots of interns, and those are the ones that are coming in from the Gen Zs. They're just with us for a few months, and then they leave. And each time we have to kind of learn how to work with them, and then by the time we get familiarized with their working styles, they leave, and we have to continue having more and more other interns as well. So I think for that, just realizing that they work really very differently in terms of the working styles, the expectations. There's also a lot of the vocab that I don't really quite
the slang,
right? So so those kind of really kind of do influence the way that we work together, right? And if I move out of the organization, indeed, there's a lot of companies that we work with. Many of them are a mix of millennials, and I would say that those are probably 30 and above, or probably in a position to be able to make decisions. And they have ones reaching out to us. So I found that it was hard because I do realize that many of them are not just representing themselves in a conversation, they're representing their organizations as they speak with us. So there's a lot of, I do find that there's a lot of need to assure them in terms of the work that we do. First and foremost, we are really looking at sustainability, which is still relatively new in the conversation.
And sustainability is a very millennial thing.
It is, or even and it appeals a lot more to Gen Zs also. And for them, it's more like it's a default. I probably already know this. Why can't you? Or what do I need to explain? And so working with organizations who then have to be convinced to pay you for that work itself, that's a little bit hard. I guess in addition, I think the engagements that we do, cleanups, the workshops and sharings, in the past, many of them are actually kind of either seen as pro bono. You just do it for free, or that you don't have to pay for such work. So in order for us to kind of share working with these organizations, and then ask of them to say, please consider paying us for this.
Consider. Not even please pay.
Please pay us for this work itself.
So actually, do you find that the millennial bosses that you talk to are more open to the idea of please pay for these things that used to be seen as pro bono? Or do you feel like even with a millennial peer, that is a hard ask to make?
I think for millennials, it's still a bit of a hard ask. We actually have some who don't see that really because maybe they have also been in the workforce for quite a while. They have been used to a culture of,
Right.
many of these are actually pro bono basis. Or if you're going to ask for a small remuneration, that's up to the organization to decide versus having it as a
see.
transaction. What was interesting was the ones that are a little bit more convinced are the ones that say that actually I now have a child and now I have to consider about the future for them. That's why I'm a little bit more open to having this conversation about sustainability within the my organization. Yeah, I guess so. I guess that portion, having a child, another generation, does influence the way that the millennials also think and act within the organization.
Yeah. Actually, I'm seeing a lot of parallels in terms of the client works that we do, in that the millennial manager that we are maybe in direct contact with as the working team, they may be fully bought into the project, but they still have to do that work of convincing their elder Gen X boss that this is more than important piece of work to do, and this is why you need to do this, and like pump in resources for this. So there's the level of generation, but there's also the level of power that both combined, it makes it so hard to move things along.
It is. I guess many of the organizations that we work with are not small entities themselves.
Yeah.
They have multiple levels to work with, and probably working at the intersection of millennials or even Gen Zs at different levels, trying to convince their various bosses, trying to also assure them that there is some impact created from here, there is meaning from here.
Yeah. Actually, that's really interesting. Like from a, how to say, like there are a lot of like organizations, powerful organizations led by millennials, but they're in the private sector, not so much like the public sector or the non-profit sector, right? And actually, we and I'll speak for ourselves, like we haven't done a lot of work. I can only think of maybe 1 or 2 jobs where we're doing it with an organization that is led by millennials. Yeah, and that has a very different flavor from working with organizations where it's quite clear the power lies with boomer, right? And so there can be a lot more discussion or convincing around things that are considered still new, not so mainstream yet. Yeah.
It is. There's a lot of, I mean, before the conversation on sustainability, even getting companies to digitalize was already a big issue. And so for many of the bosses, this is another wave of things to get used to. It can be a little bit challenging. You have to take it in.
It's me think of like in my own team. So I'm kind of like allowing my millennials and Gen Zs to decide what is the system of project management and system of like all the, it's like so terrible, like all these technological systemy things, right? Of which I'm not super duper well acquainted with.
Yeah.
And I've let them figure it out. Like, do they want to go ClickUp? Do they want to go Canva? Do they want to do all of these things? And I let them go and fight it out among themselves. And then I will just subject myself to whatever system you have chosen. And I think that for me is maybe the lazy way of like digitalizing my own organization, that I don't do the heavy lift. But like, because I believe you all know better than me what is the new stuff, and like I'll just like go with it if it makes sense. So I don't know how is that for you, because you're a millennial.
Okay, so actually that's that reminds me, because I do a very similar approach with my team. I like for you to help me to decide, but I guess implicit to that is I'm actually setting some parameters for them to be able to work with that. And I think the younger staff within the team do appreciate that. So if you can give me what I need to work on and stuff, but yet do not dictate what I should do, I think that gives me a lot of freedom and autonomy to be able to suggest something that makes more sense for the organization. And then after that, it's for me to make a decision to say, let's go for this and pay for it. Or we can just say, okay, let's revisit it once more. So I think having a bit of a game here of having some level of parameters, making a decision ready, and allowing me to make that choice, that really helps a lot.
Yeah, I'm thinking the whole idea of autonomy is probably a really important thing. It's already important for me as like a millennial, and I'm assuming it's more and more important for the Gen Zs.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's also not unrestricted freedom per
of
se.
course.
So some broad parameters that's helpful to give a chance for autonomy to set in. To know that I know what I need to do, but just do not control me in that sense.
Yeah. It's like give me the task, but don't tell me how to do it per se. Yeah.
So I guess that's helpful when it's a millennial boss or even someone who's much older who is able to frame the narrative, set the boundaries, set the parameters, and allow the Gen Zs or the younger staff to work around that. Yeah, and likewise, I guess some of the younger staff will also appreciate having some level of structure, informal structure, and to work around those.
Yes, I think we're bringing up like a really great theme here about how do you work with that intergenerational differences in how we see autonomy and power and decision making, right? And I'd like you both maybe to unpack that more because Asrin, you sit at that crossroads.
Yeah.
Right? You are at the younger levels of millennial, almost Gen Z, right? So like, what would, and obviously Li Seng can speak from the millennial view, how would you advise someone who is older, let's say Gen X and up, right? Like if they had to manage a millennial or a Gen Zer around autonomy and power and control, what would be some like, do this, please don't do this? Yeah. How would they navigate those differences?
I think, I don't know if this is a millennial Gen Z thing, but I've always known that in terms of the working style, I prefer to carve my own path. And that means that, yes, of course, I will respect you as an authority. And yes, of course, I'll take your instructions and things like that. But to some degree, I would question and push back when I see a alternative way of doing things. And actually, funny story, I remember the first or second internship that I've ever done straight out of uni. I remember my exec, who I was reporting to, she told me that I was the most defiant, quote unquote, intern that she's ever had, because I would keep asking her, like, is this really like the only way of doing things? Like, can we do something else? Like, all these other things. And it was so surprising to me that that was what she said to me, of course, endearingly, but I never knew that it was what I seek, as in autonomy is what I seek in a working capacity as an employee. Because in my mind, it seemed pretty normal to just put on the table that, hey, there's an alternative way of doing things. And I guess I've been lucky in a sense that no one's ever punished me for it. But that's also to say that I've always sought out opportunities that would allow me to be that and to have that. So I think from a millennial speaking to a Gen X, maybe a different way of doing things is not necessarily a wrong way of doing things. Maybe be curious about why or how things can be done differently, because that might open new choices and possibilities and opportunities. So be curious, don't shut it down. I think creativity cannot be shut down, because that would just create a lot of resentment. My projection.
I mean, to be honest, I think this was something that I would kind of just advise my teammates also. Really, just be curious. Please ask the questions. Please ask the difficult questions. Or why is it done this way? What's the rationale for doing this? I mean, the fact that many of the Gen Zs, and again, we're scoping very broadly here, but many of them are likely be very familiar, probably with technology. They are a little bit more in tune with what's happening around the world. I would expect them to offer, but I will not make it. I will ask of them to offer me different alternatives, offer me different views, and then we have a conversation on that. And I think that appetite to have a conversation relating to a slightly more somewhat even controversial or even just more vague topic is very helpful to just solicit the views. And just but also I think it's also helpful that to assure them that, if you're going to make it's okay to make a mistake here. And it's okay to just let's just move along with it. Like, learn what we need to learn from the mistake, and then we just continue with that conversation or the work that we need to do.
I think what's coming up for me is like all of us in Gen X were raised by boomer parents.
Yep.
And that does affect the way we see power and control and decisions, right? So differences, like if you expressed your differences to your parents, differences is not cool. Differences is not okay. And it wasn't always cool or okay. Difference could be perceived as defiance. Difference could be seen as disrespect. Difference could be seen as like you've got, you have no idea like what's going on here, little kid. And that can carry over into the workplace, right? So I can imagine how it can be triggery for a Gen X or a boomer boss. Like, why are they talking back to me? It's seen as talking back and not I'm just offering a different point of view here, but it is seen as talk back. It is seen as disrespect. But it's also like colored by parenting trauma.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And I guess I'm saying it because I don't think I had a typical Gen X life either. I chose a very different life. So that does also shape like the way I work with you guys. Yeah. So I was seen as defiant by my parents to some degree. Yeah. And maybe that is also what helps me have a lot more acceptance of defiance.
That's true. Yeah, I guess literally, and I guess given that role, I suppose that's how the organization culture is shaped, literally to the people that you attract and the way that it's being, the processes are being done.
Yeah, and I think on that note of the culture formation, I think what I'm learning more and more is that every single person in the team contributes to that. And it's while the tone may be set by the boss on top, but everybody's actions on the ground adds to that and creates that and changes and shifts that along the way. And so if you are in a place where, defiance is not tolerated, like quote unquote defiance is not tolerated, then what happens if you be that person in that space? How does that shift your entire team? Does it give permission for somebody else to also speak up and be creative and questioning in their own way? Or does it, push you down? Is that the right space for you? I think it's a lot to decide, it's a lot to consider like what you want and what you don't want in your own workspaces. Yeah.
I'm taking a pause here because I'm just reminded over the last few days that a lot of the various episodes that's coming along, not necessarily bad, but I think it just kind of brings it to mind the potential conflicts that I'm seeing, some level of friction that's coming along from the different team members. I guess, without naming any specific work itself, what I'm hearing here, what I'm experiencing would be how a certain member would like to be able to offer a different view or approach in the work that is being done. But let's say a younger member may choose to approach it differently and disagree to it sometimes. And because the boundaries are not very clear, it does seem like it's sidestepping on the work task, or that it's being seen as, in order for me to proceed with this task, I need to win over you, that argument. I think I'm taking a step back to realize that as the boss in this case, I have to kind of also set a culture of that it's, first and foremost, it's okay to talk about all this. And second of all, it doesn't have to be either or, so it could really be a sequential thing. We can do it both ways. But that culture of allowing for these differences to even come out first, to be even aired, it's important. Before you can even talk about those differences in the content, in the approaches and all.
Right. I think I'm interested at that peer level though. Like so there might be an assumption we're making that let's say among the millennials and among the Gen Zers themselves, there are no differences, or there's no there's no disagreement about how to work with differences. So I'm curious about from at that generational level, what are some maybe not helpful ways you have seen about how they treat differences that are being put on the table? This
is reminding me of the short little conversation we had before coming this room with Cam. So Cam, as you guys would have known, is a Thinky. So the Thinky experience, as we've come to realize, is a very different experience to Phoebe's. And I think what strikes me is that even though we are the same generation, because of her way of being, which is through first and foremost thought, that can rub me the wrong way a lot of times because I feel first. And I think what's not helpful is if I just immediately offended by what she says and then just shut that down or not talk about it and build up that resentment towards, oh my God, why doesn't she understand? Or like, why is she saying all these things? And I think what's helpful about the way that we've approached our relationship at the workplace is that we take a pause. I think we pause, we consider that somebody else has a different way of looking at things, and then to ask, why is that coming from? Where is that coming from? And she will ask back where I'm coming from. And while we don't immediately understand, and we will never fully understand, it leaves a space for discussion and it leaves a space for conversation. And the secret stories that we will be carrying will be minimized as best as possible. And we won't project that onto each other. So while we don't have solutions for how we manage our differences, I think even just talking about it helps the emotions on my end. Don't know about Cam.
I guess literally at the millennial level, the fact that we recognize that not every individual is the same, and that we actually have different styles and habits. It's already a big jump from, let's say, in the past where we assume everybody is the same. You are a member of a community. You are a member of an organization. In this case, there is some level of dominant traits, habits, working styles that's coming along.
And I think more importantly, you're not just a completer of the job.
That's right.
The task.
That's right.
You know, you are coming in with more.
I also find that maybe some millennials are also beginning to also look a little bit more towards values or beliefs. And I think that when we use those as a way to hold conversations or to look at tasks, it's also very helpful as a way to achieve what we need to do. So we may sometimes look beyond idealistically on things like costs and pricing and stuff. But if you can find a common ground on the and it's actually very helpful to get those conversations moving.
Yeah, I do find it is very helpful that at the millennial level, like words like diversity, inclusion, that's almost like mainstreamed, like accepted as just part of the thing. And it's the acceptance that, look, people are different. And maybe what can still be learned, no matter what generation you're in, is like, how do we address those differences? And how do we address them from some basis of we do have something in common, even if it's the bare bones minimum of you're a human being and I'm a human being.
I think even on the note of diversity, even though it may be a more talked about thing in the millennial Gen Z generation, I think it's also important to know that it's not very easy to just, hey, we are practicing diversity and inclusion. It's a lived reality and a lived commitment to the cause, right? And so I think even with the team, it doesn't mean that while, yes, we strive for diversity and inclusion, but on a day-to-day, we still rub each other the wrong way. And that's not to say we are not inclusive, but that's just to say we are figuring out how diversity and inclusion looks like.
Being diverse and inclusive is also some level of friction coming out.
Exactly. And so it's not almost like an automatic, we are diverse and we are inclusive, but how are we getting there is the thing that we are more committed to, I suppose.
I think like I guess one of the beef that I have with like the way diversity and inclusion is sometimes approached in organizations is it's very cosmetic. It's like we're diverse and inclusive as long as we have certain age groups, certain like color, certain like types. Right? And there isn't any of the hard work of like, okay, now that you threw everybody into the pot, how are they talking to each other? Because It's just about like, how come you do your PowerPoint so differently from me? Or why can't you just accept the new ClickUp system? Why must you
I'm just
use
throwing
your
out whatever.
notepad?
Okay.
You know? Yeah, I mean, it was a real discussion, right? Like, why do you insist on using your notepad? Yeah, like your physical notepad versus like this beautiful new system that I
Automated
set
system,
up.
yeah.
You know, this was a real cross-generational discussion we had in our team. All right. And if we're just able to see that we are different, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with differences, but there certainly can be a lot wrong in the way we talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think even on that note, right? So with the example of we have this very cool process automation system where it's going to cut a lot of man hours if you just use it, right? And then we have another group where it's like, I just want to be able to access it as soon and as easily as I can. And the potential for a very wrong conversation is if one expects the other to change immediately and not fully understanding why it's difficult to change. And I think, again, going back to the whole, this is what we strive for, but it's a work in progress, right? And that's not to say I fully understand that you want your notepad and you want your black and white, but it's it's also managing the internal conflict inside you that says, why can't you just use it? You know, so it's both managing it and then also interdynamics managing it.
And I think it's also willing to hear that, you know, not all things should change.
Yeah.
You know, change is not like better.
Yeah.
You know, change is not always more progressive. Sometimes like there is a reason why people don't want certain things to change. And it's also to listen, actually, why do you not want that thing to change? Like what is it that you believe about it? What works better for you in that area? And if we can sit with the differences and sit with it long enough to hear what are the underlying beliefs and values and principles under that, then we can start to see actually what makes them a lot more sense. Then I can better see this, yeah, right, that part maybe shouldn't change. This part should change.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really struck by like our last work conversation where one of our colleagues was saying like, look, like last time when I worked in this other big organization, we just wrote it on a whiteboard and it was good enough. And actually that was very helpful for me. And then our colleagues explaining like why maybe the everything on a computer system doesn't necessarily work. Right. So it wasn't an either or, but that dance of, okay, so how do we find the best both end solution that marries like actually let's keep it tech and also let's keep it like old school a bit.
I think it's making me reflect on how, because we are digital natives, right? We grow up with tech and we grow up with all these really cool processes. The inherent belief is that it's better. Or the inherent belief is
It's
that...
a default. It's probably
it's
just
a default. Yeah.
I operate this way. If you're asking me to do something else, it's asking me to change off my default.
Yeah. But that's also, it's making me reflect on maybe I may impose that same belief onto somebody else that may not need to be imposed on. So I think not even in a workplace setting, but even with my mom, like every single time my mom wants to make an online purchase, she would ask me to do it for her. And I say, but you have PayNow, you can just PayNow the person. You can do it. But she just refuses to do it. But the fear is that she accidentally puts like a extra zero behind the actual amount that she's supposed to put in. And that's the fear. But in my head, it's like, it's so easy. You just press this button and you just put in the number and it's done. And so I think, while we ask for boomers and Gen Xers to be patient with us as we want more autonomy and we want more freedom, I guess it's also me reflecting on myself that I should be more patient with the boomers and with the Gen Xers, that things are very different for them too. And it's going to get increasingly different as they get used to the millennials and now they have to get used to the Gen Zs. Yeah.
I mean, we ourselves from the millennial group will probably also have to get used to the change that's coming along from Gen Zs. And
exactly.
my understanding is there's beyond Gen Zs, the Gen A's right now.
Alphas.
Because, it's going back in. So like, whoa, it's coming along.
I'm scared.
It's really the process, I suppose, of recognizing some of the differences, learning to perhaps accept or even to work with some of the differences, and now learning to be part of that difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess because for a long time we were like we were the baby of the workforce, right?
And then now you're gonna be an old person just like the rest of us.
Oh damn. That's new habits to get
one
used
day
to.
you will be the generation that they will rebel
You
against.
know last time.
Yeah. Literally what's being shared generation to generation.
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, every generation starts off being the young rebel and ends up being the establishment.
Oh dang.
Yeah.
Shucks.
So
Okay.
it feels like we're sort of like circling back to like a closure.
Yes.
Right. So what do you think would be a great like take home for anyone listening, whether they're listening as I'm the ground person and the middle manager, or maybe I'm at the top trying to figure out how to navigate all this. Like, what would be your take homes that you like to give to a listener?
Okay, so let me start first. I'm so as a boss and all, I do recognize that there are quite a lot of working styles and differences within a team. So at least when I'm in that role, I kind of just allow for kind of let everyone know that it is okay to that we're all working in different style and to kind of just highlight those differences if we need to. I think that helps. And when it comes to conflict or potential areas of conflict, then let's bring out and have a healthy discussion about it. Relating to as an individual, it's also learning to accept that first and foremost differences exist. They're not necessarily bad, but I'm hoping to even hone the skills of adapting to those differences, learning how to talk it out, rather than going to a quarrel or to assume that actually all this is going haywire and it's going bad. But it's part and parcel of a process of sorting out between me and the other person, or me with a group of individuals, me with an organization, really. Yeah.
I think my one thing, and I don't know how practical it is for you to just take and run, but I'm always a firm believer of staying true to yourself, but also remaining curious. So stay true to yourself in a sense that if you are different, or if you stand out a little bit more starkly in your workspace, that's okay. You know, you don't have to conform to the rest of the team. But at the same time, do that while also remaining curious about what else is possible and what other opportunities are there, and not so much coming from a place that you know better and or like I know better and I this is the best way to do certain things. But yeah, stay true to yourself, but also be open and malleable, if you will. Yeah. Shall?
Actually, talking it out in this podcast made me aware of wow, my generation has a lot of trauma about am I allowed to be different? Because if I'm different, I'll get whacked.
Oh no!
Right? No, and appreciating that swimming in the millennial waters, at least that there is the safety of more or less everyone has an agreement that differences should be talked about, should be accepted, should be maybe fought out a bit better, fought out a bit cleanly. Yeah. And I guess my message would be more for my peer group of if you're a Gen Xer or even a boomer leading organizations and you're driven crazy by why are all these people so defiant and so disrespectful and to see that maybe it's not, maybe it's just they're different. And learning to talk about our differences, learning to not be triggered by it, to see something that is not there. Yeah, maybe it's just them being different. It's not them being defiant. Yeah, and I think that even that would be a huge thing to begin with. Is it possible to see it that way? Yeah. I do want to deliberately hand the mic over to you because I'm even realizing hey, actually I think I was doing a bit of leading in this.
Oh no, that's okay with me.
Well, but so for you, what's actually important for you as a close? Yeah, what would you like to ask?
What would I like to ask?
Yeah.
I think while we talk about our differences, and this is kind of similar to how we close in the first episode, but I would like to hear from each of you what you think is something you are proud of as being part of this generation and this age group?
Our respective
Respective
Well,
generation.
millennials. Yeah, Gen X and then millennials. What is one thing that you feel being a millennial in your workplace has contributed to your workspace and your team?
You have an answer?
Oh, I don't have an answer right now.
You can digest
Yeah, I
first.
need to, take a-
I can
yeah.
older person go first.
Yes, wise one.
No, not wise one, but I actually love being a Gen Xer. I love that our generation was sort of maybe the last one that crossed over from like not so digital to like full on digital. So I think we have the last memory of the transition, you see. So I do think Gen Xers are very well placed across the system to bridge that divide. We both love the taste of the digital and we also remember the taste of life before that. And there was a lot of good things before and there's a good things after. So I really, really appreciate the experience of being there, being that transition generation lah. Yeah.
I'm also not that far off from that. I guess I'm an elder millennial, so I'm still also around that same intersection of understanding what's before and after. Again, I will resonate with that actually, relating to how I've seen how things are done probably before the major changes came along, and taking the essence of those collaborations, those work itself, and trying to infuse it into a new way of working with people, with different organizations, and being open to the models and even frameworks that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
I think speaking as also again elder millennial here, I'm glad that we are comfortable in talking about these differences. We're recognizing that actually they are now starting to we're in a position of making change, and probably we can help to use those to shape the way that we work. At the family level, at the individual level, at the family level, at the society, community level. I think that's something that I'm, as a member, I'm very happy and very proud to be able to say that I'm very keen to also be part of that change too. Right?
I know we're bringing this to a close, but I think it's making me think about, oh damn, how different was it before and after? Because I obviously never got to experience that. And we'll take that conversation offline, but if you want to hear about it, let us know. And I'll just share my appreciation for being, I guess, on the cusp of Gen Z and millennial is that I might be generalizing, but we want to work for a larger meaning and purpose. And it's not just about money and paycheck and climbing the corporate ladder, but there has to be something a lot more deep-rooted in what we do and a lot more grounded. And our work has to be more grounded. And I think that's what I firmly believe in. And I am very hopeful that that's what our careers will look like. It's not just for making the rich get richer or whatever, but it's really for something and it's really for a bigger purpose. And I am proud to be part of that.
Yeah. I mean, I love what you and Li Seng said. And I actually would like to close with something I wrote on LinkedIn this morning. And because like when I work in consultancy, what I often hear from older leaders is sometimes the magic phrase like, can you run a workshop to teach like these like younger strawberries or snowflakes to like just like, why can't they just suck it up? Like why are they so like soft, you know? And I get where they're coming from, and I also want to challenge older leaders of the system here. So when you hear like a Gen Z like us and go like, yeah, I'm looking for purpose and all that, it's not you young people, purpose what? Purpose can eat, man. But to look at it maybe from a larger framework, there's a framework called the PERMA model, and it comes from positive psychology, and it's looking at actually what are the key ingredients that any human being, regardless of generation, needs for their well-being to thrive. And PERMA stands for positive emotions, engagement in the flow of like I'm doing things that I'm strong in, I'm talented in. R is like relationships that are generally supportive and caring. M is for meaningfulness, which Asrin just talked about. A is that sense of accomplishment and mastery. And they added an extra plus to it, which is sense of optimism and ability to care for your physical health. So it's not often, the PERMA model is not often applied to like workplace culture, but it should be, because you would want a workplace where everyone can thrive, right? Including the older boss. So I guess the question is, if the generation is coming to you and saying like, hey, like, I want our teams to be formed differently so that we can relate better. I want our work to be formed differently so I can see meaning and purpose in it. It's not these younger people. It's if the younger people are challenging us to look at like, is what we're doing currently working? Is it really working for all of us? Can we really thrive in it? And to see that actually all the hard stuff we put up with, maybe it wasn't okay. And like there is an opportunity now to be a part of the change, like Li Seng said. So I don't think the term cycle breaker is often applied at the workplace. It's normally applied to families trying to overcome intergenerational trauma. But I do think there's intergenerational trauma in the workplace. And we are all well positioned, no matter whether we're top middle ground or we are Gen X or Gen Z or Boomer, right? We all can have that opportunity to like, it stops here. Let's be the cycle breaker. Like maybe some dysfunctional practices just shouldn't continue. We should be connected to all of these good things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what's really coming up from me listening to both of you. Yeah.
I think as a millennial Gen X, Gen Z employee, I'm always appreciative of having the workspace to be myself fully. And I think what's special about being here is not just that it's my organization or our organization that I get to do that with, but I get to also be that with, you know, you guys as well, like Li Seng, our resident partners here, who are all also on a
in a way, part of the new wave of small organizations doing it differently.
And a lot of us millennials.
Yep.
So I think we are all just figuring out, but we all get to figure it out together.
We're together.
So differences are okay. And on that note, we will be closing this episode. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye.
Surprisingly profound.